Hello young and old, welcome to Best Around. Today we're going to be looking at the game The Lost Vikings. The Lost Vikings was released in the US in April of 1993 and in Japan and PAL regions in October of the same year. I had played the game a few times throughout the 90s and in the decade since, though I had never completed it. I enjoyed it quite a lot in those playthroughs, but to what extent do I enjoy it now? Let's get into it. The game's a puzzle platformer, an interesting mix of genres. You have three Vikings. Eric, who can run, jump and break walls by charging into them with his head. Baliog, who can shoot arrows and swing his sword. He can kill enemies and shoot targets. And Olaf, who has a shield which he can use to protect himself and the other Vikings. Interestingly, Olaf can also hold the shield above his head so that other Vikings can walk and stand on him, as well as using the shield to help him float when he's falling. Your goal is to have all three Vikings reach the exit of each level, which warps them somewhere else, hopefully back to their own time. The game starts off simply enough, but it gets tricky fairly quickly, as there always seems to be new things to take into consideration when trying to progress. The variation in enemies and in themes is fantastic. You start on a futuristic spaceship, then go to prehistoric times, to ancient Egypt, to a technology or machinery sort of world, and then to a candy or wacky world, and then back to the spaceship. Each time, there is a noticeable step up in difficulty, so whilst you might be happy to get away from a certain world, it does come with an introduction to a lot more variety. In terms of innovation, the game is definitely hitting home runs. The graphics are plenty colourful enough and clear. The music is pretty solid and never really grinded my gears despite having the same tunes play over and over. The level design is really well thought out. Most levels have, to my eyes, only one real way of finishing them, but the challenge can be finding what is required to do so. The first level of the game has it as simple as possible. Have Eric jump and climb a ladder and walk across, Baliog walk across and go down a ladder, and Olaf do the same. By the time you get to the first prehistoric level, it's now involved a bit more platforming and some keys. Later on though, things become a bit of a maze and things need to be done in very particular ways to ensure that the level can still be completed. As mentioned earlier, all three Vikings must reach the exit. If one dies, you can continue to explore the level, but the level must be restarted to be able to complete it. Some might be critical of such a thing, but I don't mind exploring further. It might mean I avoid a simple trap later on. One thing that can be very frustrating though, is that some levels are in essence trial and error at certain parts. You make a choice that seems inconsequential, but it results in soft locking or death, and thus the level needs to be restarted. This can be frustrating doing it at the end of a level that took some time to get there in the first place. Similarly, this level is a bit rough in that it's a long level with a few tricky parts, and then the hardest is right at the end, with very minimal margin for error. It's almost unfair to have something like this right at the end, no save points, no second chances. Back to the beginning. The game does have a password system and infinite lives, and thus the game has set its difficulty accordingly based on this. Every level in the second half of the game could take half an hour each. There's no pulling punches here. On the plus side though, multiplayer is great. However, the difficulty is undeniably high, and therefore multiplayer can only be fruitful if both players are really good at the game. Otherwise, you are going to die a lot. In many ways, I'm not sure how much of the game is really accessible for inexperienced gamers, which is fine. Not every game is going to be beginner friendly. I finished the game in about 13 hours. There's no shortage of game here. 37 levels. One could argue 10 or so too many, but at least people would definitely be getting their money's worth. I will spoil one level's trick, in that to proceed, you needed Olaf to stand under a falling block. I found this to be a little unfair, in that, generally speaking, blocks squash and kill. This was a bit of a strange exception to the norm, but outside of this, I found every puzzle to be fair. I also found the seesaws a bit odd. Sometimes my Vikings would incur damage, but they're falling to the same altitude as what they started at. I liken it to someone hurting themselves from jumping high on flat ground or bouncing on a trampoline. This would only happen sometimes, so it's clear there's some sort of programming issue at play. Similarly, the gravity arrows, they don't really make sense in that sideways movement affects not just the speed of your ascent or descent, but also at times negates the movement in the direction of the arrows completely. This is one of the dumbest things I've seen in games, and it's things like this that make me lament coming back to this game. Unfortunately, the later levels have tainted the fond memories I had of the game. I'd give The Lost Vikings a 6 out of 10 for enjoyability and an 8.5 for difficulty. The puzzle aspect is great, but the platforming is a letdown. The floatiness of the jumps and the momentum in terms of horizontal movement seems a bit inconsistent. The bubbles were also a bit off, Olaf's shield was a bit off, and the spikes hitbox, they really contributed a lot to both these scores. Also, the last couple of levels showed the game had badly lost its way. It left the puzzle aspect in a big way and made the game seem more like a true platformer, which was by far the weakest part of the game. The last few levels are much more of a chore to complete than anything else, and that's a real shame. As alluded to earlier, the difficulty is pronounced, especially in terms of sections that were instant death, especially in the later levels. You have to be ultra precise with your movements, and given that a slight touch of the spike means death and level restart, the consequences are severe. Is The Lost Vikings a top 10 Super Nintendo game? I'll keep this one pretty brief. The answer is a firm no, but the idea of combining the two genres is a great one, but if the platform mechanics were more refined, then maybe this could have been in the conversation. Unfortunately, there's glaring deficiencies that become more apparent the longer you play the game, and it's always rough when a game seems a lot less enjoyable the longer you play it. Stay tuned for the next game chronologically in the series, and I'll see you all next time.